I've thought about what I would say to her, the woman I was before all of this. I've imagined sitting across from her at the kitchen table on that particular Thursday morning in October, the one where the fog came in low off the water and sat against the windows like something breathing. I've imagined watching her press her palms flat against her coffee mug the way she always did when she was thinking, the way she tilted her head before she spoke, the particular stillness she had. The kind of stillness that isn't peace, but looks exactly like it. I've thought about what I would warn her. She needed the tide gauge log, the faded green notebook with the spiral binding she kept in the shed because Daniel said it cluttered the kitchen. She needed the conversation she heard through the bathroom wall and told herself she had misunderstood. She needed the way his hands went quiet in his lap the night she told him about the promotion. Quiet in a way hands don't go quiet unless something beneath them is bracing. She needed every single one of those things to become who I am now. And I think even now, even standing on the other side of everything that followed, she would have believed him anyway. Her name was Mara Calloway. She was 44 years old. She had spent 17 years building a life with a man she had chosen carefully, deliberately, the way she chose everything, with her eyes open and her hands already working. She was a marine ecologist, which meant she spent her days studying the patience of water, the way it returned, the way it remembered every shoreline it had ever touched, the way it carried things, sediment, salt, the chemical signature of everything upstream, and deposited them somewhere else, far away, without drama. She had always felt a private kinship with the carrying. The house was theirs, Mara's and Daniel's, and it sat on the north end of Harrow Point, a small coastal town on the Oregon coast where the wind came off the Pacific without apology, and the summers were short and gold, and the winters were the kind of dark that made people either leave or go quiet. Most people went quiet. The Callaways had gone quiet, together, which Mara had always taken as a sign of compatibility. The house had a shed that faced the water. Mara kept her field notebooks there, her tide gauge records, her sample jars, a spare pair of waders, a rusted tackle box that had belonged to her father, and that she had never opened because she didn't need to and because some objects are not meant to be used, but only kept. The tackle box sat on the bottom shelf of the shed like a small, sealed thing. Every morning before she left for work, Mara walked to the end of the property and checked the tide marker. It was a habit left over from her graduate fieldwork. Technically unnecessary now that she had remote sensors and an institutional data feed, but she kept it. Her husband had asked her about it once, early in their marriage, and she had said, "I just like to see it myself." He had smiled in the way that meant he understood something about her. That was the version of him she returned to. In those last weeks, that early smile, the morning that everything began. Mara was checking the tide marker. It was a Tuesday, the 14th of October, and the sky was doing the particular thing it did in autumn at Harrow Point. White light, flat and diffuse, the kind that shows you everything without warmth. The water was calm. A cormorant sat on the marker post with its wings spread to dry, which was ordinary, and Mara watched it for a moment, the way she always watched things without expectation. When she turned to walk back to the house, she nearly stepped on the phone. It was lying in the wet grass at the edge of the path, face down, in a patch of ground that stayed damp long after rain because the soil there was heavy and the grass grew thick and closed over puddles. The phone was in a black case, which was why she had almost missed it. She bent down and picked it up. It was Daniel's second phone. She didn't know it was a second phone in that moment. She only knew it wasn't his usual phone, because his usual phone was on the kitchen counter. She had seen it there 10 minutes ago, and this one had a different case, a different model, and a different lock screen photo. She stood in the white morning light with the phone in her hand. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She turned it over once, then again, and then she set it on top of the tide gauge post, with the same careful motion she used when handling sediment cores gently, precisely, with total attention to where it landed. She went back inside. She made herself toast. She ate it standing at the kitchen window watching the water. Because she already knew. Even if she wasn't ready to name it yet, that the life she had believed in was not the life that existed. The morning passed. Daniel came downstairs at 7:30, said good morning, poured coffee. He was a civil engineer, tall and easy-moving, with dark hair going silver at the temples. He worked for a county infrastructure firm in Tillamook, 40 minutes inland. He had a calm, reasonable face. It was one of the first things Mara had loved about him, the calmness. After years of men whose energy moved like weather, unpredictable and pressure-fronted, Daniel had felt like a rival. She watched him pour his coffee. "Did you lose something outside?" she asked. "Not that I know of," he said. He didn't look up. "I found a phone in the grass by the tide marker." There was a pause, less than a second. She had spent 17 years in a house with this man, and she knew the length of his pauses the way she knew the shape of the shoreline from memory and from repetition. This pause was different. It was the length of a decision being made. "Oh," he said. "That must have fallen out of my jacket yesterday." "Different model than yours," she said. "Work phone. The firm started issuing them for certain project communications. Didn't I mention it?" He looked up now. His expression was easy, reasonable, the face she had loved. "No," she said, "you didn't." "I'm sorry, it slipped my mind. Nothing interesting on it, just project correspondence." He smiled. "Want to look through it?" She held his gaze for a moment. "No," she said. "It's still outside." He went to get it. She watched through the window as he walked to the tide marker, picked up the phone without looking toward the shed, and put it in his jacket pocket. She noticed that he did not look toward the shed. She noticed this the way she noticed details in the field, not urgently, but completely. The kind of noticing that becomes a record. She went to work. The drive to the research station took 22 minutes. Mara drove it every morning along the coast road with the window cracked, which was a habit from graduate school, when her field truck hadn't had working heat, and she had told herself she preferred the cold air anyway. She had kept the habit through 3 cars in 17 years because there is a kind of discipline that begins as necessity and ends as identity. At the station, she had a standing 8:15 with her research assistant, a 26-year-old named Penny Ochoa, who had come to Harrow Point on a summer fellowship 3 years ago, and stayed because, she said, the light was different here. Penny was thorough, cheerful, and had a photographic memory for data she had personally collected, which Mara valued above most other professional qualities. "The kelp transect data came back from the lab," Penny said, setting a folder on Mara's desk. Mara opened it, looked at the numbers again. "The density's down 18%, she said. "Since April. The water temperature shift is accelerating faster than the model projected." Mara ran her finger along the column. The numbers were doing what she had been afraid they would do for 4 years, moving in the direction that the data had been quietly predicting, steadily, without drama, each small measurement a step in a direction that only became clear when you held all of them together. "Does anything ever surprise you anymore?" Penny asked, watching her. Mara thought about the phone in the wet grass. "Not about water," she said. She spent the morning on reports. At noon, she ate lunch at her desk and opened her personal email. There was a message from her sister Rena, who lived in Portland and called every Sunday and worried about Mara in the particular way of younger sisters who believe their older sisters are more self-sufficient than human. The email was about Thanksgiving. Mara read it and did not reply. There was also, below the email from Rena, a message from an address she did not recognize. The subject line was blank. She almost deleted it. She was in the habit of deleting blank subject emails because she was methodical about her inbox in the same way she was methodical about everything, and blank subject emails were, statistically, either spam or errors. She almost deleted it. She opened it instead. The email contained 11 words and a phone number. The 11 words were, "I think you deserve to know what's been happening." She read it twice. Then she looked at the sender address, a string of letters and numbers at a free email provider, the kind of address that is specifically designed to be untraceable. She did not recognize it. She wrote the phone number on a post-it note. She folded the post-it note and put it in the inside pocket of her field jacket. She closed the email and did not archive or delete it. She left it sitting in her inbox, like a stone brought in from the water, out of context. Heavy, not belonging. Then she opened the Kelp Transect data again and worked until 5. Daniel made dinner that night. He often made dinner on Tuesdays because her Tuesdays ran long. He made pasta with a red sauce from a recipe he'd learned from his mother. And the house smelled the way it had smelled on hundreds of ordinary evenings. Garlic, olive oil, the particular sweetness of tomatoes opening in heat. Mara stood at the kitchen island and drank a glass of water. "How was the data?" he asked. "Not good. The temperature shift is accelerating." He made a sound that was sympathetic and attentive. "The kelp. Down 18%. You've been expecting it for years." Expecting something and watching it happen aren't the same thing. He looked at her over the saucepot. His expression was warm, engaged. This was also one of the things she had loved about him, the way he listened. The way he asked the right questions. She had known scientists whose partners' eyes glazed when they talked about their work, and Daniel had never done this. He asked specific questions. He remembered details from months ago. He had once, during a difficult grant cycle, left a paper coffee cup on her desk with a note that said, "The tide always comes back." She had kept the note in her field journal for 2 years. She thought about the 11 words on the screen. Did the firm issue all the senior engineers second phones? She asked. Just the project leads on the coastal infrastructure contracts. There are some communication protocols the clients require. He stirred the sauce. Why? Just curious about the policy. It's pretty standard. He turned down the heat. "Ready in 10 minutes. She set the table. She thought about the angle at which the phone had lain in the grass, not near the path to the house, not where someone would naturally walk, but at the edge of the property where the ground sloped toward the water. As if it had been set there deliberately, or dropped while standing somewhere specific, looking at something specific. She laid 2 forks on 2 napkins. She straightened them. She thought, "I will give this exactly 1 more week." This was how Mara had always made difficult decisions, not with a dramatic resolution, but with a finite interval. A week, a month, a field season, a specific amount of time in which she would continue observing without changing her behavior, collecting data without drawing conclusions, watching without naming what she saw. It was her professional training converted into a personal habit. It had served her well. What she didn't understand yet, and what I have had a great deal of time to think about since, is that she had been doing this for 17 years. Not a week, not a month. 17 years of quiet, methodical observation, of trusting her instruments, of carrying things she hadn't named yet because she believed in the patience of gathering. She had been protecting him with her own silence. She just hadn't recognized it as that. 2 days later, she called the number. It rang twice. A woman answered. She had a careful, even voice, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has rehearsed the first 15 seconds of a conversation many times. "My name is Claire Prentice," the woman said. "I've been waiting for you to call." "How did you get my email address?" "It's on your research station's website." A pause. "I know this is uncomfortable. I'm sorry to have done it this way. I didn't know another way." Mara was sitting in her car in the research station parking lot. The engine was off. Through the windshield, she could see the water, flat and silver under an afternoon overcast. "Who are you?" she said. "I was with your husband," Claire Prentice said. "For about 8 months. I ended it in July." Another pause. "I thought it was over. Then I found out from a friend that there's someone else now. Someone new. And I thought about whether I would want to know. If I were you, and I decided I would." The water outside was the same water it always was, the same specific weight of silver light on the same specific ocean she had been measuring for 19 years. "Say that again," Mara said, not because she hadn't heard it, but because she needed the interval between hearing it the first time and the second time to let the first time settle. Claire Prentice said it again. Mara did not cry. She looked at the water. She said, "Thank you for calling," and she meant it, not sarcastically, not bitterly, but with the specific gratitude you feel towards someone who has given you something that hurt them to give. Then she asked 3 questions. She was precise. She asked for dates, for a specific location, and for whether there were any communications she could verify. Claire Prentice answered each question with the same careful, even voice. When Mara hung up, she sat in the car for 4 minutes. Then she drove back to the research station and spent 2 hours reviewing the instrument calibration logs from the summer monitoring buoys. Because the calibration logs were due, and because there are moments when the most necessary thing a person can do is return to the thing they are good at. That evening, she did not tell Daniel what she knew. That evening, she began. What Mara did next is the part that most people wouldn't understand. Most people, I think, would have confronted, would have demanded, accused, broken something. Mara was not most people. Mara was someone who had spent her career understanding that the value of data is proportional to the completeness of the record, and that an incomplete record can be worse than no record at all, because it lets you draw the wrong conclusions with confidence. She did not want to draw the wrong conclusions. She started with time. Over the next 3 weeks, she began keeping a secondary log in a small red notebook she bought at the drugstore in town. Not the spiral-bound field notebook she kept in the shed, but a plain red notebook she kept in the inside pocket of her field jacket, along with the folded Post-it note. In the red notebook, she wrote dates, times, observations. When Daniel said he was working late, when the County Roads app showed his car transponder parked somewhere other than the office, when his phone, the second phone, went silent for stretches of an afternoon in ways she had started to recognize, she was careful. She was very careful. She kept her behavior exactly the same. She made coffee in the mornings. She asked about his projects. She sat beside him on the couch on Thursday evenings and watched the documentary series they had been slowly working through for the past year. A series about ocean migration patterns, which was maybe the universe's version of irony, but which Mara simply watched because she liked the cinematography. She was quiet. She had always been quiet. It was Penny who first noticed something was different. "You've been running the same current model 3 times, Penny said one afternoon, appearing in the doorway of Mara's office. "The same one. 3 times. Mara looked at her screen. It was true. "I keep finding discrepancies," she said. Penny leaned against the doorframe. She was 26 and serious, and had the kind of directness that Mara both valued and found occasionally difficult. "Is everything okay?" "Fine," Mara said. "Thank you, Penny." Penny did not move from the doorframe. "I've been here 3 years," she said. "I know. If there's something, you can say so." Mara looked at her. Penny had been 18 when her mother got sick, which was why she had done her undergraduate degree in 2.5 years at a state school in California before transferring to the master's program that had brought her to Harrow Point. She worked every day with total focus, and she went home to a small rental house 2 blocks from the water, and she had never, in 3 years, left work before 6. Mara had never asked her why she stayed in Harrow Point after the fellowship ended. She had simply kept her on, and kept her on again, and never said aloud what she understood, that Penny had nowhere particular to go back to, and that this place, for now, was enough. "There's something," Mara said, "but I don't have enough of it yet." Penny nodded, once. "Okay," she said. She went back to her desk. "That was the first time. A small thing, but I remember it because of what came later, because of what Penny was holding. Quietly, that she had not yet decided what to do with. The depth of the betrayal began to clarify in the 4th week, in the way that things clarify when you have been patient enough to keep looking. It did not clarify all at once. It clarified the way fog lifts along the Oregon coast. Slowly, in patches, and then suddenly you can see the water. And then suddenly you can see all the way to the horizon. And you realize you had been standing in the fog much longer than you knew. The first thing was the timeline. Mara had asked Claire Prentice for dates when the relationship had begun, when it had ended. Claire had said 8 months from October of the previous year to July. Mara had written these dates in the red notebook. Then she had gone back through a year of ordinary memories with those dates as a frame, and something had shifted. October of the previous year. She had been in the middle of a major grant application, one of the largest of her career, a 5-year research partnership with a university consortium. She had been working 7 days a week. She had been tired in a way she could feel in her hands, the specific tiredness of sustained effort. Daniel had been, she tested her memory, attentive, kind. He had picked up more of the household work without being asked. He had made dinner. He had left her alone to work without making her feel guilty about it. She had thought, at the time, that it was generosity. The second thing was geography. The County Roads app, which Daniel had installed on her phone during a storm season when the coast roads sometimes flooded and he worried about her commute, showed her the same information it showed him. She had used it occasionally for traffic. She had not used it to track his location, because she had not had a reason to. Now she did. On a Wednesday in November, the app showed his work phone transponder at a location 40 minutes south of Tillamook in a town called Depot Bay. He had told her he was at a site meeting in Tillamook. Depot Bay was where Claire Prentice lived. Mara closed the app. She sat with the red notebook in her lap, and she did not write anything for a long time. The window of the research station faced the water, and the water was doing what it always did in November gray, and heavy, and working itself up towards something. The third thing was the money. She had never been particularly vigilant about their shared finances because there had never been a reason to be. They had a joint account for household expenses, their own individual accounts for professional costs, and a joint savings account they contributed to monthly. It was a sensible arrangement. She had looked at the joint savings account with the same frequency she looked at their joint household account occasionally, routinely, without purpose. She looked at it with purpose now. There had been a series of transfers out of the joint savings in the past 14 months. Not large amounts, $200, $300, once, $450. Spread out enough that they did not stand out in isolation. She was not an accountant, and she was not forensically looking for fraud. She was a scientist who was building a record. And a record is about pattern, and the pattern of these withdrawals, once she held them together, had a shape. She counted the amounts. 14 months of small transfers. The total was close to $4,000. She sat very still. She understood that the specific amount was not the point. What the amount told her was duration. It told her that whatever this was, it had not begun 8 months ago. It had begun longer ago than that. 8 months was only the version that Claire Prentice knew about. I need to tell you something about Daniel that complicates this. And I need to tell it now, because what Mara would discover in the 38th minute of her investigation would change the shape of everything that came before it, including the money, including the geography, including the particular quality of his attentiveness during the grant application season. Daniel Calloway had not always been the person he had become. There is a version of this story in which he is simply a man who chose dishonesty, chose it repeatedly, built a parallel life with the casualness of someone who believed his primary life was solid enough to bear the weight. That version is true, but it is not the whole truth, and the whole truth matters here. What Mara did not know, what I did not know until later, was that Daniel had been a different kind of person in the years before he met her. Not cruel, not calculating, but afraid, and young, and in possession of a capacity for damage that he had not understood until it was too late to undo. He had been with a woman before Mara. Her name was Sonia. They had been together for 2 years, in his late 20s. And during those 2 years, Daniel had been, by his own accounting, which Mara would eventually find, written in a letter he had never sent, kept in a locked file on his work laptop that she would eventually be given access to by people he had not anticipated, a man who slowly, systematically dismantled someone's confidence. Not violently, not cruelly in the obvious sense, subtly. The kind of subtlety that looks like concern when it is control. The kind that looks like love when it is possession. Sonia had eventually left him, had spent a long time rebuilding something afterward. And Daniel confronted, finally, with what he had done, by a mutual friend who told him clearly had spent the years since living with the specific guilt of a man who knows he is capable of harm and has committed himself to never doing it again. Except that he had not healed the thing that made him capable of it. He had only suppressed it. And suppressed things move underground. And underground, they move differently, without direction or intention. And they emerge in different shapes. His attentiveness to Mara had been real. His love had been real. His fear of losing her, of being the person she would eventually see clearly, had been real, too. And fear of that particular variety does not make a person protective. It makes a person preemptive. It makes a person begin to find other places to put the self that cannot bear to be judged by the person they love most. This is not a defense. The money, the lies, the second phone in the wet grass, none of it becomes smaller because of what Sonia suffered and what Daniel carried. But it does become human, and that is worse, in some ways, than if it had been simply monstrous. Mara found the letter on a Friday, 3 weeks after she had found the phone. She had not been looking for it. She had been returning Daniel's work laptop to his study after charging it. He had left it in the living room the night before, and she had plugged it in without thinking. And as she set it on the desk, she glanced at the screen, which had gone to the screensaver, a photo of the two of them on a research trip to the Farallon Islands 4 years ago. They were both squinting into the sun. She was holding a water sample. He had his arm around her shoulders and was laughing at something she had said. She stood in front of that photo for longer than she should have. She was not going to open the laptop. She was building a record, not invading private files. The record she was building was about what he had done, not about what he was. Then her hand moved anyway, the way hands sometimes do when the rest of you has not yet caught up to what you already know. And she lifted the screen. The laptop was password protected, but Daniel had given her the password 2 years ago when she had needed to use his laptop for a video call because hers was being serviced. He had given it to her the way you give someone a password when you believe they will never actually use it, trusting that trust would make it irrelevant. She typed it. It worked. She was not looking for anything specific. She went to his documents folder out of the same reflex she would use in the field, general reconnaissance before focused sampling. Most of the folders were what she expected: engineering files, project folders organized by client and contract number, a folder labeled receipts, a folder labeled insurance, and a folder, at the bottom of the list, with no label, just a date from 3 years ago. She opened it. There were 3 files. 2 were financial documents. She recognized the format, a kind of disbursement record. And she looked at the amounts and felt something cool and clarifying move through her chest. The 3rd file was a document. She opened the document. It was a letter, addressed to Sonia. She read it completely. She read it twice. By the time she finished the second reading, she understood several things simultaneously. What Daniel had done before her, what he had believed about himself because of it, and why a man who believed he was already guilty would not stop himself from acquiring more guilt. Not because it didn't matter to him, but because it confirmed the verdict he had already quietly delivered against himself. She closed the laptop. She replaced it on the desk exactly as she had found it. She walked outside to the end of the property, to the tide marker, and she stood there for a long time while the water moved against the rocks below. Then she called Rena. Rena came on Sunday. She arrived at 4 in the afternoon with 2 bags of groceries and the expression she wore when she was carefully not showing that she was afraid. She was 41 and worked as a nurse practitioner in Portland and had been married to the same man for 11 years and called every Sunday without exception. She set the groceries on the kitchen counter without asking and began to put them away. "Tell me," she said. Mara told her. She kept it precise. She used the red notebook for reference and laid it out the way she would lay out the findings of an investigation timeline. Evidence. Pattern. Rena listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Rena, and when Mara finished, she put both hands flat on the counter and looked at them. 17 years, Rena said. Not all of it, this 8 months with Claire, possibly longer with someone before her. And the money. The money has been going somewhere for 14 months. I don't know all of where yet. Rena was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? This was also unusual. The usual thing from a younger sister in this position would be to have an opinion, to be angry on someone's behalf, to propose a course of action with the urgency that anger makes available. I don't know yet, Mara said. I'm not ready. Is there more you need to find? Yes. Then find it. Rena stayed until Tuesday. She slept in the spare bedroom. She cooked every meal. She went with Mara to the research station on Monday and sat in the waiting area reading a novel while Mara worked. And when Mara came out at 6, she said nothing about the fact that Mara had been inside for 9 hours. On Tuesday morning, before she drove back to Portland, she stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her older sister for a long moment. You're the only person I know, Rena said, who handles a catastrophe the way you'd handle a field season. Is that a bad thing? No, Rena said. It's just that I'm glad I'm not the one who did this to you. After she left, the house was quiet, in the way that houses go quiet when the person who made the noise has gone, a particular, pointed silence, more noticeable than the ordinary silence. Daniel was at work. Mara stood in the kitchen and listened to the quality of the quiet and understood that it had been there for a long time, this quality. And she had filed it under contentment instead of under its real name. It was November now. The storms were coming. She could feel them the way you can feel them when you've lived on this coast long enough. A change in the pressure, something in the way the air moved, a quality of the water that was different from storm season, but wasn't anything you could point to specifically. It was the accumulated knowing of many seasons. She went to the shed and took down the green spiral-bound notebook from 1997, the one that had been on the bottom shelf since she first moved into this house. The year after her graduate fieldwork, which was also the year she had met Daniel at a research conference in Seattle. She had brought the notebook with her because she had brought all her field notebooks from graduate school, out of sentiment and out of the same instinct for preservation that made her keep the tackle box. She opened it to the first page, her own handwriting from 19 years ago, blue ink, slightly smudged, field measurements, precise. 23-year-old Mara Calloway, standing in front of a shoreline she would spend the next 2 decades studying, writing down what she saw. She closed the notebook and put it back. She took out the red notebook and opened it to the most recent page. She added a line. 3 weeks in. Record is clear. What she still needed, what she understood she needed, without yet knowing exactly how she would get it, was not more evidence of what had happened. She had enough of that. What she needed was what she had been unable to find through observation and documentation alone. The name of who else was involved. Claire Prentice had told her there was someone new, someone Daniel had moved to after July. And in 3 weeks of observation, Mara had not been able to identify who that was. The second phone was locked, and she had not been able to access it. The County Roads app showed locations, but not contact names. The financial records showed transfers, but not recipients. She needed a person. She did not expect the person to be Penny Ochoa. It was a Thursday in late November, late afternoon, and Mara was closing out her data files when Penny appeared in the doorway again. This time, she was not holding a folder. She was holding a cup of coffee, the kind you bring for someone when you need to have a conversation that requires something in your hands. She held it out to Mara. Mara took it. I've been trying to decide whether to tell you something for about 3 weeks, Penny said. The quality of the afternoon light changed. It didn't change physically. The light was the same flat November white it had been all day. But something in the room shifted, in the way rooms shift when they are about to contain something important. Tell me, Mara said. Penny sat down in the chair across from the desk. She held her own cup in both hands. Last summer, she said. I went to the Anchor for dinner, the bar on the pier. You know it. Mara knew it. She and Daniel ate there sometimes. I was there alone, Penny said. Reading. I was in the back booth, the one by the kitchen, the dark one where you can't see from the bar. And I saw Daniel come in. She stopped, looked at her cup. He wasn't alone, Mara said. No, Penny looked up. He was with a woman. They were, it was clear what it was. I didn't know what to do. I looked at my book. I thought maybe I should leave, but I couldn't leave because they were between me and the door. And I didn't want to walk past them, so I just sat there. Did you recognize her? I didn't then, but afterward, I was at the grocery store and I saw her, and I recognized her face, and I looked at her name tag. Mara was very still. Her name is Laura Voss, Penny said. She works at the county planning office in Tillamook. She's on the coastal development permit team. Daniel's firm handled coastal development projects. Daniel worked with the county planning office on permitting. This was not a coincidence. This was proximity becoming gravity. The ordinary way that the things we tell ourselves we won't do become possible. Not through planning, but through the accumulated small steps of available opportunity and want. How long have you known? Mara asked. Since August. Penny's voice was steady, but her hands were not entirely still. I'm sorry. I didn't know whether I thought maybe you already knew, and it was something you'd decided to. I told myself that, but it wasn't true. I just didn't know how to tell you. Mara looked at her research assistant, 26 years old, 3 years in this building, this office, this shoreline. She had been carrying this since August, which was 3 months ago, which meant she had sat across from Mara at the 8:15 meeting every morning for 3 months, with this in her hands, trying to decide. You were protecting me, Mara said. Penny blinked. I was. I didn't know if it was my place. No, Mara said. You were protecting me. You didn't want to be the one who broke it. She paused. That's not a criticism. I understand it. I've been doing it myself. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the wind had come up off the water and the windows were beginning to sound the way they sounded before serious weather. Is there anything you need me to do? Penny asked. Mara thought about it carefully. Nothing yet, she said. But I may need you to tell me what you saw, officially, at some point, if it comes to that. Okay, Penny said. I will. Mara drove home in the beginning of the storm. The confrontation happened on a Saturday in December, which I want to describe carefully because confrontations are almost never what people imagine they will be. And this one was less than most. Not because Mara had been preparing for it. She had been preparing, in the precise, methodical way she prepared for everything. But because Daniel was not, in the end, a man who had been living without knowledge of what he was doing. He had been living with full knowledge of what he was doing and had made the daily decision not to stop. When you tell the truth to someone like that, there is no revelation. There is only confirmation. She waited until he was home, on a Saturday evening, while the storm that had been building since Thursday was fully present outside. Rain against the windows, the sound of the water loud and constant. The house filled with the particular smell of a coast storm, salt and something electric. She poured 2 glasses of water and set them on the kitchen table. She sat down. She asked him to sit down. She told him what she knew. She was specific. She named Claire Prentice. She named the dates. She named the money. She named the County Roads app. She named Laura Voss. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She kept her hands flat on the table. When she finished, the silence in the room was different from all the previous silences. This one had the particular quality of something that had been put down after long carrying. A weight deposited on both sides. Daniel sat across from her and looked at his hands in his lap. Those same quiet hands she had noticed on the night she told him about the promotion, and she understood, finally, watching him, that the quietness of his hands was not peace either. It had never been peace. It had been the contained stillness of a man who had spent many years in custody of something he couldn't release. "I know about Sonia," she said. He looked up. "I found the letter." He didn't ask which letter. There was only one letter. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," she said. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand that I know the full shape of this, not just the last 14 months, the full shape." He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "I kept waiting to be the person I was trying to be." "I know," Mara said. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that's not enough." "No," she said, "it isn't." Outside, the storm pushed hard against the house. The windows held. The weeks that followed were the logistics of unmaking a life, which are not dramatic in the way that the discovery was dramatic. They are patient and procedural and exhausting in a way that has no specific emotion attached to it, only duration. She spoke to a lawyer in Portland who Rena had recommended. She assembled the financial records with the same care she assembled research data, complete, organized, with a clear chain of documentation. She applied for a research grant extension using the additional data she had collected during those weeks. Because the work did not stop, because her personal life was restructuring itself. The kelp transect data had to be submitted. The monitoring buoys had to be calibrated for winter. Daniel moved out in January. He took what he needed. He left, at her request, without the kind of final conversation that leaves people with more to carry. She had said what she needed to say at the kitchen table in December. Anything after that would only be repetition. And she had never been interested in repetition for its own sake. The morning he left, she walked to the tide marker. The storm season had passed its worst point and the water was calmer. Cold and gray, the winter color that is different from the gray of autumn in a way that only people who live near the water can distinguish. She checked the tide gauge. She wrote the reading in the green, spiral-bound notebook she had started keeping there again at the end of November, not in the red notebook, which was full. But in a new field notebook she had bought at the drugstore in town, green this time, she recorded the number. The tide was higher than the same date the previous year. Not dramatically, 9 centimeters, but persistently. It had been rising by small, measurable increments for 19 years, each year a fraction more, and each individual measurement looking unremarkable until you held them all together and saw the direction of the thing. She wrote the number down. She capped the pen. The cormorant was on the marker post again. Or a cormorant. She had no way of knowing if it was the same individual from October. It had its wings spread to dry in the same posture, asymmetric and serious, the posture of something that has been in the water and is now managing the aftermath. She stood next to it for a moment in the early light. Penny was at the station. The data was waiting. The consortium grant had been approved. She had received the notification the previous Friday. The largest research funding she had ever secured. Enough to extend the kelp monitoring program for 5 years and hire 2 additional researchers. And finally instrument the deep water sampling array she had been designing in provisional form for 3 years. She had read the approval letter twice, folded it, and put it in the inside pocket of her field jacket. There was a lot of work to do. She was 44 years old. The light was the particular sharp, pale light of a winter morning on the Oregon coast, the kind that shows you everything without warmth. The water was doing what water does, returning, carrying, depositing what it carried somewhere else. She turned and walked back to the house. There is a thing I want to tell you about silence, now that I am far enough from it to see its shape. I spent 17 years in a marriage that was real. I want to be clear about that. The things that were good were genuinely good. The mornings, the research conversations, the way he understood the parts of me that other people found excessive. The love was real, and the loss of it is real, and I am not interested in retroactively making it nothing in order to justify what came after. But the silence, the specific silence of the silent protector, the silence I wore like a field technique, patient and methodical, the silence that I had always believed was a form of love, that was the thing I needed to put down. Not the silence of waiting and observing. I kept that. It serves me well. But the silence that said, love does not need to be witnessed. The silence that said, if I carry it quietly enough, it will be safe. The silence that said, I do not need to name what I see, because naming it might disturb the thing I am protecting. I had been protecting a version of the marriage that had not existed in the same form for a long time. Protecting it the way you protect a shoreline that is already eroding, precisely and methodically and without effect. Because the water doesn't negotiate. What Penny gave me by speaking when she was afraid to, by putting down the thing she had been carrying for 3 months, was permission to do the same. Not to confront earlier, not to react with more force, but to stop protecting the silence itself. I called her the following August, after the legal proceedings were complete, and Daniel had relocated to Tillamook, and I had reorganized the house into the shape of a life that belonged to one person. I called her on a Tuesday morning before the 8:15. She answered on the second ring. I wanted to thank you, I said. You don't have to, she said. I know I don't have to. I looked out the kitchen window at the water. I wanted to... There was a small pause. How are you? She asked. Working, I said. And then, because it was true, and because some truths are worth saying aloud, good. The grant team was assembling. 2 new researchers were starting in September. The instrumentation for the Deepwater Array was being fabricated by a marine technology lab in Newport. The kelp transect data from the 2nd season of the new program was coming in better than the model had projected, not dramatically. Not reversal, but a stabilization in 2 of the 3 monitoring zones that was, if not exactly hope, something that resembled the conditions under which hope might eventually be possible. I kept the Greenfield notebook. I kept the red notebook in the inside pocket of my field jacket. I kept the tackle box on the bottom shelf of the shed, sealed, as it had always been, not as a memorial, but as an object that had outlasted its original purpose, and found a secondary one. Which is what objects do when you let them. I did not keep the second phone. That had gone with Daniel in January, along with everything else that belonged to the parallel life. I kept the tide gauge records, 19 years of daily measurements in spiral-bound notebooks, the full record, unbroken, each day's number sitting next to the number before it and after it. Each one unremarkable alone, each one part of a pattern that took years to see clearly. I checked the marker every morning before I left for work. I wrote the number down. I kept going. Those who destroy others never truly escape what they have done. They only flee down longer roads. I understand this differently now than when I first heard it. I used to read it as a comfort, as a promise that justice was patient, that the road eventually ran out, that what was owed would eventually come due. And maybe that is still part of it. But what I know now, standing at the end of this particular road, is that the sentence has a second meaning. It is not only about the person who fled, it is about what they are fleeing from. The guilt that Daniel carried, the genuine, unprocessed guilt of what he had done to Sonia. The guilt that had calcified into a belief about his own nature. The guilt that had become, over years, the seawall he built to keep from looking at himself clearly. That guilt did not dissolve in the 14 months of the other life, or in the 8 months with Claire, or in whatever came before. It followed him. It follows him still. I imagine, down the longer road. And the silence I kept the 17 years of carrying things without naming them, the discipline of the field, applied to the life that silence was not preservation. It was participation. I did not cause his choices, but I created conditions in which his choices did not have to announce themselves. I was so careful not to disturb the surface, that I never checked what was moving underneath it. I have stopped being careful in that particular way. I check the water every morning. I write the number down. I sit with what the numbers mean, even when what they mean is hard, even when the direction of the data is not the direction I would choose. I have stopped filing difficult information under easier names. This is not, I should be clear, a story about revenge. The financial portion was resolved fairly in the proceedings. He received what was his, and I received what was mine. I did not take more than I was owed, and I did not give more than I agreed to give. I did not call Laura Voss or write letters to anyone's employer or do any of the things that people sometimes do when they are in pain and want the pain distributed more widely. I had enough of my own work to do. What I did was finish the record. That was all. I had 17 years of observations, and I finished them. And then I started a new notebook, and the new notebook has different data in it, a different shape, a different direction, its own pattern, that will only be visible years from now when there is enough of it to read. This is what I meant when I told Penny I was good. I meant the work continues, the tide returns, the record is clean. On a morning in March, 8 months after Daniel left, Mara walked to the end of the property before dawn. The sky was doing something unusual. A band of clear, cold air had moved in during the night, and the stars were visible in a way they almost never are on the Oregon coast. Sharp and separate and very far away. The water was quieter than usual. The tide was at its lowest point of the month. She stood at the tide marker, in the east, over the coast range. The light was beginning. Not sunlight yet, but the precondition of sunlight. The sky going from black to a particular dark blue that is its own color, belonging only to that specific interval between night and morning. She had seen this color 1,000 times from fieldwork. She had always thought it was the loneliest hour. Standing there now, she did not find it lonely. She thought about the notebook on the shelf in the shed, the spiral-bound one from 1997, 23-year-old Mara's fieldwork, blue ink slightly smudged. She thought about the girl who had written those numbers into that notebook, standing on this shoreline before she knew it would be her shoreline, recording what she saw with careful precision, trusting the data to tell her what she needed to know. She thought you were right to trust that. She wrote the tide reading in the new green notebook. She capped the pen. She looked at the water. The cormorant was on the marker post, or a cormorant. Wings spread, asymmetric, managing the aftermath of something. She watched it for a moment. Then she walked back to the house. The light was coming. This has been a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Names, characters, businesses, places, and incidents are products of imagination and do not represent any real persons or events.